Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kristen Blow, and I'm a behavior analyst. I am here today to talk to you guys about communication and the importance of communication. So I'm going to give everyone a few minutes to log in here. I see some of you are already on. Today, I will have a PowerPoint that we'll go over, and I have some visuals to show you, and I will answer any questions that you guys may have as we're going over everything. I'm going to mainly be talking about communication and how it affects some of the individuals we may know with autism or other developmental delays. The one thing that we do know is that individuals with autism typically have some trouble with communication. So I want to kind of explain what communication is, how we can help them be able to communicate with us better, and how we can better communicate with them to make them feel more comfortable when we are all communicating. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with my slideshow, and please feel free to ask any questions as I go along. I am more than happy to answer anything. Okay, so we're going to talk about communication, what it is, and why it's important. So communication is a behavior. That is one thing that we always want to keep in mind. When we are communicating, that is a behavior that we are displaying, and we want to make sure that when we communicate, we try to make sure that we can communicate clearly and make sure that people know that what we're trying to express to them. So communication is the way that we exchange our thoughts, our opinions, any information through speech, written, or nonverbal expression. And language is the way that you communicate using words. So this can be written, this can be spoken, or this can be signed. So anytime you're sending emails, text messages, if you write a letter, these are all ways of communicating. So communication is a two-way process. It uses more than just words. You will use your eye contact, facial expressions, gestures. These are all important things that we want to remember when we're teaching language. A lot of times when we are communicating with individuals that may have some developmental delays, they do not always pick up on our nonverbal cues. So we want to make sure that we are verbally expressing what we want to them as well as using our nonverbal communication. So verbal communication is the use of words and sounds to express ourselves, where nonverbal communication may be how we express ourselves using physical gestures, our posture, our facial expressions, but we also want to remember that this can include using visuals or the picture exchange communication system, which is also known as Pecs, and I will speak more about that as we move along. So when we look at communication and individuals with autism spectrum disorder, we want to remember that individuals with autism often find it hard to communicate. Sometimes it's because they develop language at a slower rate. Sometimes they may be nonverbal. They may have difficulty understanding the language that you're using. They might have difficulty just being able to initiate interactions or initiate any kind of communication with you. Or they might have difficulty responding. So challenging behaviors often occur due to challenges with communication. You might see self-harm, tantrums, aggressions toward others. These are often caused due to some kind of lack of communication skill. They typically are trying to get across something that they want or need and are not able to do so, so this becomes frustrating. So when we look at this, we want to know that behaviors do tend to occur due to frustration, anxiety, or confusion. They may not understand what you're trying to say. They may not be able to get across what they're trying to say. They may feel like you're not understanding what they're trying to say, even though you think that you understand. So we have to look at when we're seeing these negative behaviors, there's always a reason and a function behind these behaviors. So we want to make sure that when we are looking at this, we are looking at the whole picture. We want to acknowledge the fact that these behaviors that we see can prevent them from having successful participation in school and family activities and just in daily activities that they might have to do in their life. And so we want to make sure that we can figure out how to teach them to communicate to make these daily interactions more successful for them and more of a positive experience. So what's important when we're teaching communication is we want to look at functional communication. Functional communication is how you get your basic needs and wants across. When I tell you I'm thirsty, I'm hungry, I need to use the bathroom, this is functional communication. This typically begins within the first year of life, and you'll see this with gestures, and it expands over time using words, short sentences, phrases, and then you begin to learn full sentences. So we also want to remember that just because you are interacting with a child that is verbal, that does not mean that they have functional communication. There are some children who have echolalia, which means that they will repeat things, words, phrases that they've either heard, things that they've heard you say. They might be repeating scripts from TV shows, and they typically attach a meaning to these phrases. So when you are working with a child and you see that they have echolalia, you will start to realize that this is their way of communicating. So if I were to go to a child and say, "Are you thirsty?" Instead of saying yes, they may say, "Are you thirsty?" Because that's their way of telling you, yes, I am thirsty, but they don't understand the fact of saying yes or no yet. So in that instance, you would want to teach them, yes. So are you thirsty? Yes. And try to get them to respond the same way. That's going to be a big thing. We've seen a lot of echolalia in many kids, and it can be in any age. It's not just toddlers. You see it up through adulthood in some cases. So the way that we tend to address these issues are using functional communication training. And functional communication training is basically teaching meaningful and functional ways to communicate to a child. We teach this in their natural environment. This is going to be any time that you're talking to them, asking them questions. If you have a child who wants you to look at something, but instead of saying, look, they might wave it in front of your face like this, or they might just try to put their face in front of your face. And so you would prompt them at that point, look, and show them how to show you to look. It could be maybe they bring you a juice that they can't open and they're just handing it to you and pushing it to you, and you would teach open. And you can teach this using language, you can teach this using signs. Sometimes we use pictures. It's all just going to depend on the learner. Functional communication training is used often in the field of applied behavior analysis, and we use it to replace challenging behaviors with appropriate communication. You might have kids who, when they can't open something, they might throw it instead of bringing it to you. These are times where we're going to teach them the appropriate behavior. If you have a child who is banging their head on the table because they want juice, you as a parent might know that that's how they're asking for juice, so you come in and you give them the juice because you don't want them to hurt themselves. What we would do to teach this language is we might start with teaching them to bang a cup on the table instead. So that way they're not harming themselves. Banging a cup on the table is still not the way that we want them to ask, but it's a step closer to getting what they want, or the way that we would like for them to ask. So we might start with teaching them to bang the cup on the table and then they get juice. We might then start to have them bring the cup to you for juice. If we decide that we want to use pictures, we would start pairing the picture of the cup with the cup and have them bring you the picture of the cup for juice. So we're going to take their current behavior and we're going to use little steps to teach them the appropriate way to ask for what they want. And like I said, this does not always mean teaching them the words. It could be a gesture, sign language, pictures or icons. It's just going to depend on your learner and what's going to be easiest for them at that time. So the goal of functional communication training is to teach appropriate communication to decrease the occurrence of challenging behaviors due to frustration and anxiety. Frustration and anxiety often occur in children with ASD and other developmental disabilities due to the inability to communicate their wants and needs. So again, when we're looking at these behaviors, we want to look at what is the function behind them. Do they have a physical need that is not being met? Are they looking for attention? Do they need help with something? We are going to look at all the pieces of this puzzle to try to get them to where they need to be. This is not a quick fix. It can take weeks, it can take months. It's going to depend on the learner, and it's going to depend on the way that we're choosing to teach them. So if we're not going to teach language vocally right away, then we might use alternative augmentative communication. And this is all the ways that we share our ideas and feelings without talking. So this can be texting, writing, pictures, and the way that we do this is going to be personalized to meet that individual's needs. So this could be sign language, but then we have some children who don't have the imitation skills or the fine motor skills for sign language. So we might look at a communication board or a communication book, which will have pictures in it for them to point to, and they would bring the book to you and point to the picture to show you what they want. We could use voice output communication aids. These are typically on phones, iPads. Those are what you're going to see more often nowadays. There are different apps such as Proloquo and LAMP. There are more out there, but what these do are they have pictures embedded in them, or you can take pictures to put in, and you would put the pictures of the items that the child would need, and they can touch these pictures, and the device will output what it is they're asking for. The cool thing about these different systems are that you can start off with 1 picture, 2 pictures, however many you need at the beginning, and you can build from there. So you might start off with just pictures of things that they know and things that you know are their preferred items. And from there, you can start building into maybe more non-preferred stuff. You can start building into sentences. You can start having them pick by color. I want the blue chair or the pink chair. And it gives them a way to communicate exactly what it is they want, but it also lets you kind of teach them piece by piece. So you're not overwhelming them with everything at one time, because when you initially get it, it will have everything on the page at first. So you can go ahead and personalize this to where the child is and what you want them to be able to access at that time. So it'll kind of cut down on any confusion that you may get. So Picture Exchange Communication System, the PEC system, is a widely known system protocol that is used to teach language to children. It's typically started when they're of toddler age, and it can be used for if the child is nonverbal, but it's also used to teach language. So you would pair the language with the pictures. It's, again, another alternative way to communicate. And it's something that you can use. So even if the child does have language, you might use PECs as something that they can use when they're with an unfamiliar adult. Because a lot of times when we're with the kid daily, we kind of pick up on what they're saying, different phrases they may have. If they have special words for something, we will know that because we're with the child daily. But if they're with somebody new or unfamiliar, they may not know that. So you could also use PECs as a backup that they could use when talking to people that they're not quite familiar with. The PECs protocol includes systematic error correction. So it helps them learn without making multiple mistakes. It is a step-by-step system that is used. And when they make a mistake, it shows how you go right in and correct it automatically without allowing them a lot of space for error, because if they are being reinforced when they're making errors, they're going to think that they're doing it the right way. The cool thing about PECs is that it doesn't use verbal prompts. So this kind of helps build the initiation and the interaction that we want, and it'll avoid prompt dependency. So the fact that it doesn't use verbal prompts, it's kind of, it's different than what you would usually do. So if they go, say they pick the PEC, but then they go the wrong way to give it to somebody else, or they pick it and they drop it. Instead of going in and verbally correcting them, you're gonna go in and model. You're gonna hand over hand help them to exchange that picture the correct way. PECs consists of 6 phases, And it begins by teaching an individual to give a single picture of a desired item or action to a communicative partner who immediately honors the exchange as a request. So when you are teaching PECs, you want to make sure that whatever it is that you're teaching, you have readily available to give. If they give you that PEC, you want to be able to give them what they're asking for immediately. And you might have a child who say they want a cup of water, but they bring you a PEC for a toy that they want instead. You're going to give them that toy and you're going to show them that that's what they get with the picture that they gave you. So if they give you the picture of the toy, you're going to give them the toy, show them that. If that's not what they want, you lead them back to the book, and without talking, you'll show them what the picture of the cup, so that, and then you'll have them pick the cup and give it to you, and they'll get the water. So it's kind of a trial and error for them, but it's a very effective way of matching visuals with what it is that they want. You're also going to pair language. So when they bring you the cup of water, you're going to say water, 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 and give them water. You're going to label each thing that they're asking for, because you're then pairing that language with a visual. So some communication tips when you're communicating with individuals with autism or with other developmental delays, you want to make sure you use their name so that they know that you're talking to them. A lot of times they might be interacting with something else at the time, so you want to make sure that you are gaining their attention before you start asking questions, giving instructions. Before you start in a conversation with them, you want to make sure that you have their attention. If you're just trying to engage them in activities or engage them in conversation with you, you want to try to use their preferred interests. Communication, especially for those with developmental delays and with autism, it is something that has to have a purpose to them. So if you just want to talk about the weather and they're not interested in the weather, they don't see what the purpose of this conversation is or why they should be engaged in it. But if they love dinosaurs and you start talking about dinosaurs, you might have a full-blown conversation because this is something they're interested in. This means something to them. And so now you've got them engaged, and you may be able to put in some more non-preferred topics as you continue the conversation. But when we're teaching how to have conversations, we are going to use their preferred interests as the starting point. You want to use visual supports when you can. A lot of times when we are dealing with individuals with autism, we know that their auditory processing is slower. So we want to have a visual available if we can to help pair with the language that we're using and give them a visual example of what it is that we're talking about. Maybe if we're giving them an instruction to do something, it'll show what they're going to go do. These are just ways to really give them some support in understanding the language, because you have to understand the learner that you're with, and you have to understand what is their style of learning, what is the best way to communicate with them, because that's going to be how you can move forward. You want to use less nonverbal communication because you want to make sure that what you're saying comes across clearly. And you want to say less, and you want to say it slowly. So when we have conversation, we typically will have longer-winded sentences, conversation, but when we are dealing with someone on the spectrum or somebody who may have some communication issues, we are going to want to use less words, especially if you're dealing with a younger learner, rather than, okay, we're going to the bathroom and we're going to go wash our hands and then we're going to go have snack. You're going to sit down and you're going to tell them, okay, time for the bathroom. You let them go to the bathroom. Let's wash hands. And then you're going to say, snack time, because if you tell them that they're going to go do all these things, you probably lost them after bathroom. So we want to make sure that we're breaking this down and letting them understand, giving them that chance to sit and process what it is that we're saying. You want to use keywords that they know or that they're familiar with. Sometimes for some learners, you're going to have to teach each part of a conversation. You're going to have to teach each lesson on what a certain word might mean or what a certain activity is, so that they know what it is that you're talking about when you say these things to them. And you want to limit the amount of questions you ask. For a lot of our learners, it can be hard to answer open-ended questions. So you want to make sure that when you ask a question, it's a very direct question. You want to make sure that they know how to answer a question. If you've never seen this child answer a question, that might not be something that's in their skill set at this moment. So that might not be something that they are able to do. A lot of times when we're teaching how to answer questions, the first thing we're teaching are yes and no. And when we're teaching yes or no, we are teaching this using factual items. We are gonna hold up a picture of a ball and say, is this a ball? Yes or no? And they're gonna say yes. I might hold up a flower and say, is this a ball? And they're gonna say no. But we're gonna teach this using factual questions because we need them to know yes and no before we can just start asking them about wants or likes. I know this happens often, saying no to a child can cause a lot of behaviors. What we want to look at and remember is that they can't always see past no. So they don't know exactly why you're saying no. So if you can try to use a different word, especially if they're engaging in maybe a behavior that you would like them to stop engaging in, we might say, try again. If they're running down the hall, instead of saying, no, don't run or stop, we might say, try again, let's use walking feet. Or if they're climbing on the table, try again, feet belong on the floor. We want to try to use words like that rather than telling them no, because for a lot of children, no is a trigger word, and we want to try to avoid that. And if it's not that they can't have the item or activity, but maybe they just can't have it right now, we want to try to tell them that using time frames if possible, if they can understand. So you might use a first then, like, oh, not right now, first snack, then TV, or something like that. But you don't want to just tell them no. You want to try to give them a time of when they can access that item or activity. And if it's that they're never going to be able to access that item or activity, then you want to be able to give them an alternative that they can have. So if you have a child who is maybe allergic to chocolate, but they want chocolate chip cookies, they're never going to be able to have those chocolate chip cookies. So you can tell them, oh, we can't have those, but we can have, and give them an alternative to what they can have, because that allows, one, for them to understand why they can't have it, but also that there is something else available that they can have. So that is a large part of communicating too, is just understanding that when we're telling them no, it means something completely different to them sometimes. So we want to make sure that we are being clear about what it is that we're communicating. So I have here, I made almost like a little Pecs board. I don't have my actual Pecs book with me, but I have here a small Pecs board, and this one says, oh, well, let me take that off. I just had that there so I wouldn't lose it. But this says, I want drink. So this might be for a learner who has been doing Pecs for a while. But if you are starting out with somebody who has never seen Pecs before, typically what you're going to want to do is take a picture of the item that you're using. So I have a Pec here that has an actual picture of the yogurt. So what I would do is I would put the yogurt on the board, and I would have just that yogurt there. I wouldn't have any other items on there to distract them. And I would teach them that this is what they want. So when they want yogurt, they'll pull this off, they'll hand it to me, and I will give them the yogurt. The cool thing about this is that you can practice it multiple times over and over again to give them a chance to learn this, because what you can do is you can give them one spoonful of yogurt. And then once they eat that spoon, you have the spoon back, and they're going to have to give this Pec all over again to make sure that they can have that yogurt. So Pecs does have their own website. They actually also offer trainings, and they do them online as well. And these are not just for professionals, they're for parents, for professionals, families, anybody who would like them. There's also, if you just Google AAC devices, what they'll probably come up with just the different apps that you can use. Most often now you're using these different apps on an iPad or a phone. There are some kids who are highly motivated by iPads and phones, so these are not the best ways to teach them because they just want to play on them. So what we've done in instances like that, I've had families who may buy an extra device, and that device is dedicated only to communication. They are not allowed to watch YouTube on that device. They cannot play any other games. The only thing that is on that device is that app. And depending on your learner, if they have insurance, if this is a completely nonverbal child, there are some insurance companies that will also cover them getting a device and getting these different services. So that is something great to look into if you have a learner that is completely nonverbal, because some of these things can be kind of pricey. That is one reason why if it's a younger learner, I do enjoy Pecs, because you can make these at home. I just used a piece of paper, I laminated it, put some Velcro on it, and you can take pictures of the things that they want. There are things, Teachers Pay Teachers has a lot of pages with different Pecs pictures. I make my Pecs pictures on Word or PowerPoint, and you can just upload the picture you want. You can get a picture from offline, and then I just cut it out, laminate it, and put it on the board. The one thing that I always make sure to talk about is that when we are teaching communication and we are teaching these young learners how to let us know their wants and needs, you want to make sure that you are starting with their most preferred items, because it's going to give them the most opportunity to start requesting. One thing I know a lot of people I've seen when they are potty training and your child is using Pecs, I've seen people want to put the potty Pec on your Pec board. If your child is not potty trained and is using Pecs, you're not going to want to use the bathroom Pecs until they are potty trained, because at that moment, that Pec has no value to them. So when you're doing Pecs, you want to make sure that everything you're using has a value, because if it does not have a value to them, then they do not want to pull it because it means nothing for them. The whole point is that you're teaching them that there is reinforcement in communication. Just like any other behavior, if you want to see it continue to increase, then you're going to need to be able to reinforce it. So with communication, you're going to have to be able to reinforce what they're asking for. That is why it's important, if it is not available at that time, you want to be able to give them alternatives that are available. A lot of times you could even, if you have a higher learner who maybe at the moment isn't able to communicate, you want to look at your environment when you're around. Sometimes you have kids who can communicate, but if they're in a crowded area or somewhere that's very loud, they're not able to really process their thoughts and things like that. So again, that's why Pecs can be helpful. But also if you just have a higher learner, you might be able to just bring a laminated piece of paper and a dry erase marker with you at all times. And you can always just write for them, I want, and then let them fill it in. That's another great way to communicate. We tend to use that a lot with our token boards. That is how we will teach many things. We will use the token boards, and across the top, it'll say, I want. And for my earlier learners, under I want, I will keep Velcro so I can put what they want. I want a hug, or I want yogurt. So I will put that there so they can see what it is that they're earning. And as they earn their tokens, they know that they're getting closer to getting that reinforcement. So we just always want to make sure that when we are communicating with our learners, we look at where they're at as well. Excuse me. Sometimes we have learners and it feels like they're not paying attention. So we want to make sure, again, that we have their attention before we start. We want to make sure that we are getting eye contact. Excuse me, I'm sorry. And we want to make sure that we are using their preferred interests. because that is going to increase their engagement. Does anybody have any questions as of yet that I can answer? Okay. So I also want to talk about when we're in the classroom and we're communicating with kids. A lot of times the classroom can be a very overwhelming place for kids. I'm so sorry. A lot of times the classroom can be an overwhelming place for kids. There's so much going on. In a lot of areas, the ratio is so large of children to teachers. So one thing that we can do for kids to help with their engagement and to help with their communication in the classroom is making sure that they are able to access what they need. Some kids, you're going to have to teach step by step on how to raise their hand, on how to gain attention. You will have some kids who will sit in the back and will say nothing, and they might not be doing anything. They're not causing any problems, but they're also not accessing the education that they need because they are unable to ask the appropriate questions. For individuals like that, you might have a question board that you leave on their desk. And with that, it'll prompt them on different things that they can ask. If they're unsure of what you're doing at that time, you can have something, and it could be, again, something very simple. Right now, a lot of us are teaching from home. So if you have a school-age child and they're not always able to get, what they need, or to be able to ask the questions that they need, you might be able to just write at the top of their thing, we'll have the subject. So math. The first part will be worksheet. And under that, you might have them list what is needed. They're going to need their paper. They're going to need their pen. So they know if they don't have these things, you can also put raise hand. So if they're missing any of these things or they have a question, they will know to raise their hand. Some kids just always need that visual to be able to ask for help. The cool thing about Pecs is, again, we have help Pecs. We have Pecs that will let kids say that they're all done or they want more. So we just always want to make sure that they are able to access what they need no matter where they are. In a classroom setting, it might be harder for a child who is using a communication book or who is using a Pecs book, because if there is one teacher that is teaching, then it might be harder for them to be able to walk up and exchange that. Typically, if you're going to have a learner who is using this kind of communication system, there will be an extra adult in the room. And what you will want is to have that extra adult be accessible to them to be able to communicate during this time. That way they can come over, they can see what they're pointing to on their book. They're available for you to come and give them the Pecs, because if there is not a communication partner readily available, that will also decrease their motivation to communicate because they don't know who to communicate to. So even if you're in the classroom, if we are in a situation like that, what you're also going to want to do is to teach the child that this is your communication partner during these times. So it might be that you have a visual on their desk and you might put the teacher who's available, you'll put her picture there so they know to go to this teacher to communicate. Again, in classrooms, you will see many more behaviors oftentimes because they are not able to communicate right away. Maybe they can't access what they want right away. So making sure that you have different things readily available for them is huge. Making sure that they know what is available and what is not available is huge. We just always want to make sure that their physical needs are most important. We always want to make sure that they're able to request what they need physically. So for a typical child, they might be able to raise their hand to say, can I go to the bathroom? For a child who is using a PEC system, you might just have them hold their PEC up and show it to show you that they need to go to the bathroom because they're not going to be able to wait for you to come over and check. So we just always want to make sure that we are looking at our learner, looking at the way they communicate. What is the best way to communicate with them? Are they going to need visuals? Are they an auditory learner that's still going to need a visual support? Are they an auditory learner who can read, or can you write down what they need? If they can't read it this way, you can always use pictures as a way to remind them of what they can access or who's around. So communication is huge, especially when we're looking at increasing positive social behaviors and decreasing maybe some of those problematic behaviors that you may get. A lot of times when you have the aggression and the self-harm, those are the harder ones to kind of decrease through using communication, because a lot of times once they're engaging in these, it is hard to distract them from these things. So what you're going to want to do is be proactive in these situations. If you know that there are certain things that trigger them every time, you want to have their way of communicating readily available. So if you know that every time you tell Johnny it's math, it's time for math, he drops to the floor and starts hitting his head on the ground. You're going to want to, one, make sure that you are in place so that you can block him from hitting his head. And two, you might be able, if it might just be, even if Johnny is a verbal child, you are still going to want to have a visual that they can just hand over. So if we know that he does not want to do math at this time, and if we ask him to do it, this is what's going to happen, then we're going to want to make sure that this card is around and he can instantly say, all done. And you can say, okay, we'll wait 5 minutes and set a timer to show them when we are going to engage in that activity. But you want to teach them these different ways to communicate if they want something or don't want something, because a lot of times it might be that they don't want that thing. And I know that we can't always let them get out of it, but if we're going to try to teach that appropriate way to protest, then you're going to have to give them some times where they can get out of it, because we have to show them that these things can be effective. So what you'll start out with is, you might start out with, okay, all done, we don't have to do it, because you want to reinforce them giving this card. So once they're successfully, every time you tell him, okay, it's time for math, he's giving you this card successfully without falling to the ground, then you're going to shape it to, okay, we'll wait. We're going to wait 10 minutes and then we're going to do math. After you're able to shape that time down to shorter times, oh, now we're down to 2 minutes. We're going to wait 2 minutes and then we're going to do math. That is when you can start to maybe every now and again say, oh, I know we don't want to do math, but first we're going to do math, and then you can have, and you'll give them a preferred activity. So again, teaching functional communication is not always a quick process. For some kids, it may happen in days depending on what the behavior is and what it is that they're trying to communicate. For some kids, it could take weeks and months, just depending again on what it is that we're trying to change. So we always just want to make sure that before we start teaching these behaviors, we're going to want to first identify what is the behavior that we want to change. So for Johnny, we wanted to change his tantruming and self-harm. So then we're going to look at, when do these behaviors occur? We know that it occurs when he is asked to engage in a non-preferred activity. So why do these behaviors occur when he is asked to engage in a non-preferred activity? It is typically because he does not have the appropriate language to protest. So we're going to look at what are the ways that we can teach them to protest. And you're probably going to want to teach it in more than one way. You might want to use a visual. You can give a sign, all done. You can teach, if they are more verbal, you can teach them to say, no, I don't want to, not right now. So you're just going to look at your learner and you're going to decide what is the best way to teach them this new behavior. And then you're going to start implementing it, and you're going to implement it slowly, especially if it is that they are engaging in any self-harm or physical aggression, because you want to make sure that you and the child are staying safe during the teaching of this. So if you start teaching it and you realize that what you're doing is actually increasing the behavior, you might want to go back and look at, okay, so what is our next option and how to teach them to protest? So it's not always going to work right the first time. We might have to pull out different things. So we're just going to have to look at that. Again, if you're teaching a child and you have a kid who's nonverbal, I do suggest Proloquo as an app to use. This has been one that I've used with many kids, and the one thing that I really enjoy about it is that it does start off as almost like a Pecs board, where you can kind of shrink the size and field of what it is that they can access, but it also grows up until where it's basically like a text and they can type to you exactly what they want to say and it'll say it. So I do enjoy that one because it allows them to grow with the app. It allows for you to really personalize it the way that you want. Again, it lets you take your own pictures, so that way you can show them exactly what it is, because some of our kids, a lot of what we need to work on is generalization of things. So if I were to just pick any yogurt, they may not use it because they only eat this yogurt. They may not want a picture of just any person. They're going to want specific pictures of people or shows. Some kids are fine with you just putting a TV on there and they can pick TV. Some kids are going to want to know the exact show that they can ask you for. So it's just going to depend on your learner. We always have to remember how individualized this is going to be. No matter what, the same thing is not going to work for every child. So whether you're in the home, whether you're in the community, whether you're in the school setting, you want to look at what is the way that this person communicates, what is the easiest way to help them. Again, if you have a child, I have worked with a child who was completely verbal at home. He would request anything that he wanted. He could talk to mom and dad, ask them for anything. However, when he went to school, he would not speak. He was fully potty trained, but at school, they did not realize that. And he had multiple accidents because he was not able to request to use the bathroom because he had separation anxiety. So what we did was we put in place for him, even though he was completely verbal, we gave him a communication board. And it had all the different pictures of what it was that he may need to access during the day, whether it's the bathroom, if he was hungry, if he was tired, if he needed a crayon, if he wanted to go outside. All of these things were on there. All the pictures of his teachers were on there. And he was able to start communicating with his teacher slowly by just giving pictures. As he started giving the pictures more consistently, we then had his teacher start to require that he just say the word of the picture. So when he gave the picture of the bathroom, he would just say bathroom. He didn't have to say, I need to go to the bathroom, or can I use the bathroom? Just bathroom, or hungry. We did it that slowly. And then as he got more comfortable in saying that, he on his own began to initiate, I need to use the bathroom. I want to read a book. And this did take about 2 months total time, but it was about him getting comfortable in his setting and in his surroundings and around the people around him to be able to communicate. So just because your child is verbal, if they go out in the community and they have troubles with communicating with others, you might want to just have a quick little communication board that you keep with you just so that they can be able to communicate with others in the community. And that might be the way that you have to start. We always also want to make sure that we are encouraging and reinforcing their communication, especially when they start to try to gain your attention. That's a huge one because that means that they're now starting to initiate conversation, and that is great. So even if it's that they're coming up to you 25 times saying, look, and just showing you a shoelace, it doesn't always have to be something that you understand, but this shoelace might be great to them. And really what's reinforcing for you is the fact that they're coming to you and initiating this interaction. So we just want to make sure that we always remember that our children's communication is not always going to be verbal. And it might not always use sign. It might not always use PECs. It might not use any visuals. It might just be their eye contact. They might make a certain facial expression at you. For some earlier learners, they're going to start communicating with you by pulling your hand and leading you places. And that's great. When they're leading you to these things, when they get to where they're at, you just pair language with what it is. So if they brought you to the pantry and pointed to the crackers, you're going to tell them, crackers, crackers, here's a cracker. And you might give them one cracker at a time. So that way they're constantly having to make some kind of communication with you. Sometimes it's just an eye contact. They might finish that cracker and meet your gaze. You, again, reinforce that eye contact, give them that cracker, and pair that language with it. And it is a long process, but at the end of the day, it's going to help them when they're moving forward in life. It's going to help them in the school setting, in the community, in their daily life. So we just always want to make sure that we realize how important communication it is, and that just because a child is engaging in a behavior, we really want to look at why that behavior is occurring. What can we do to help them be able to communicate what it is that they're lacking at that moment? Again, with no is a trigger word for so many kids, and that's typical or non-typical. No is not a word that anyone really likes to hear. I am big on telling kids, like, let's try again, or hey, this is what we can have. I try to stay away from the negatives. We do need to teach no, but I try to teach it in a way of them learning yes and no first, rather than me initiating no to them all the time. And again, rather than saying no, when you offer them a replacement or you tell them when they can have it, this gives them a different way to communicate. This lets them know that this is still available. We just can't have it right now. Or this is not available, but I can have this instead. And sometimes they'll choose neither. Sometimes they'll just choose to sit and cry about it. And that's okay too, because that is also a way of expressing themselves. So we just want to make sure that at the end of the day, we have done everything we can to teach those different modes of communication. And if it still ends up in tears at the end, that's okay sometimes. We just have to try again later. So that is my spill on communication. Are there any questions from anybody at this time? Well, I have enjoyed talking to you all today. I will be doing another training on Thursday. That training will be about how to use visuals in the community and in the home as a support. I look forward to seeing you guys there, and I thank you all for joining me today. Please let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to reach out, to email me at any time. I am more than willing to help. I thank you all for joining me, and I hope you all have a great afternoon. Bye. Thank you.